Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to Utility Sports. In today's video, we're going to be discussing some of the head coaching vacancies with some of the recent firings, also some of the firings over the season. It's going to be quite an interesting offseason here for some of these teams. There are 6 head coaching vacancies at this point, as well as a few GM vacancies. But before we jump into this video, I just want to remind you all to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We're right about at 1,400 subscribers. We'd love to have you be a part of the crew here at Utility Sports. As we continue growing, we've grown really quickly. I did not expect to be here at this point by the new year, and we are. So thank you guys so much for those of you who do subscribe, who do support us. We have some merch in the description below, as well as our socials. Go follow us on there, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. All right, Austin, now let's jump right into this here. The 6 teams with head coaching vacancies at this point are the Houston Texans, who fired Bill O'Brien, the Atlanta Falcons, who fired Dan Quinn, the Detroit Lions, who fired Matt Patricia, the New York Jets, who obviously fired Adam Gase, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who fired Doug Marrone, and the Los Angeles Chargers, who most recently fired Anthony Lynn. Looking at those teams, Austin, obviously some interesting situations there, some names that maybe we didn't expect getting fired at the start of the year, one of those being Anthony Lynn. Walk us through kind of what you think about some of the breaking news. Obviously, some of these were very expected as well.
Yeah, so a lot of these were expected, like you had just mentioned, but looking at the Chargers situation, very, very interesting how this panned out. Obviously, they went on a little bit of a win streak here down the stretch of the year. They lost a lot of close games, a lot of really close games, and just a few games. If Anthony Lynn does a better job managing, they very well could have found themselves in the playoff hunt for sure, possibly even in the postseason. So Anthony Lynn's game management was not very good. Obviously, that's what led him to being out in LA. Ended up finishing with a 33-31 record. Pretty good for the Chargers. Had that year that he did go 12-4, very, very impressive. However, at this point, they decided to go opposite directions. Tom Telesco will look other places. Brian Daboll's a name to kind of keep your eye on. He's the offensive coordinator for the Bills. Obviously, has really unlocked Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. Really pairing those two guys and showing that he can have a very, very powerful offense with some top tier playmakers. Only one playmaker, a true playmaker, on that roster right now in Buffalo. But I really got to give the Bills a ton of credit for his success so far. But Brian Daboll's a name to watch. Another name to kind of watch in this is Eric Bienemy, right? We have to kind of separate the play calling, and we have to figure out, is it Andy Reid? Is it Eric Bienemy? More likely it's Andy Reid for the offensive success, but Eric Bienemy has learned a ton in his time under Andy Reid, so that's always great to have that experience along with a very good resume in terms of what your offense does. Eric Bienemy will get a job this offseason. Last year, he obviously did not come out with the head coaching gig. It's very possible that he was offered, but he was maybe holding out for something a little better. Now he's going to have more of a picking. There's quite a few teams like Detroit and Atlanta that are really looking at Bienemy as great candidates. New York Jets have also tried to interview Eric Bienemy. We'll see if that goes through. It's very possible that Bienemy decides to just take one of the other jobs that I've listed prior. So that's a big name to watch in all of this. Let's look at the Texans job, right? We have Bill O'Brien being fired. Romeo Crennel did an okay job filling in. Still was not a successful season. Brian Schottenheimer from the Seattle Seahawks as their offensive coordinator would be a possibility for them. I think the Texans need to do a really good job being thorough in their search. You have a franchise quarterback. You have one of the greatest defensive players of all time in J.J. Watt on the roster still, who's passionate about winning. So I think that's a very veteran-led team. There's some other teams like they talk about with head coaches and college coaches. That's something I want to get into. But when you are a veteran-led roster, most of the time you want to have a veteran, minded head coach rather than trying to pull up a college guy, right? So guys like PJ Fleck, Pat Fitzgerald, you're not going to want to bring into the Texans, but you wouldn't mind doing it as much for Jacksonville or the Jets or possibly even the Lions because they have a lot of youth on those teams, in particular Jacksonville and New York. But at this point, a lot of head coaching vacancies that are interesting. We have some college names. Pat Fitzgerald has done a really nice job at Northwestern, has completely transformed that program from a nothing to a contender every single season. Most of the time they have been ranked under Pat Fitzgerald. PJ Fleck has done a nice job changing the culture of Minnesota football. So those are two guys to monitor at the college level that are interested in making the jump. So at that point, we got to kind of look at the Jets situation, right? The New York Jets have the number 2 pick. They have a ton of cap space. They have Sam Darnold, a lot of moving parts in this. What is Joe Douglas going to do? And Sheldon, I want you to kind of pitch in here because you are a Jets fan. What do you think they'll do, and what do you want them to do here?
I ultimately think Eric Bienemy is going to be their lead target. I think he's going to be the guy they go after, someone who's going to either open up, whether it be Justin Fields or Sam Darnold moving forward. I think that's going to be where they want to go. Now, if Bienemy wants to be the coach of the New York Jets, that's yet to be seen. He's going to be the top coaching candidate here in a lot of instances. I think the Falcons are going to be really interested in bringing him in. Even the Lions might want to try and go get him. He's going to be the guy with the biggest market out of all these coaches, in my opinion. So ultimately, I think Brian Daboll from the Buffalo Bills will be the New York Jets' next head coach. I think they're going to be very aggressive, pulling him away from Los Angeles, who is in the process of interviewing him here in the next couple of days. I think that's going to be the direction that the Jets end up going. They're going to pull a guy from the division rival Bills. They're going to like what he has done there with Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen. I think Justin Fields is going to be an intriguing guy for him. I ultimately think that's probably where they'll go with in the draft if they do bring in an offensive coordinator like Daboll. And just quite frankly, looking at the Jets, there's just so many different issues with the team right now that I think a head coaching change is needed. For sure, Adam Gase was a terrible head coach. But I think at the same time, it's not going to really propel this team too far at this point. There's so many different needs. You're looking at probably the thinnest team in football. They don't really have a lot of, true high-level starting caliber players. So I don't know if Daboll is going to really be the solution. We've seen this before, though, with Todd Bowles to Adam Gase to now whoever we end up hiring. It'll be interesting for the New York Jets. Ultimately, looking back at the Texans when you're talking about, wanting them to bring in a veteran head coach, I definitely think that makes a lot more sense. Two guys we've seen actually interview there already, Marvin Lewis and Jim Caldwell. Austin, walk us through what one of those two could bring to that Texans franchise. Obviously, they don't have a lot of assets in the draft to really recoup talent. What could the road for the Texans look like?
Yeah, so for the Texans, it's all about getting a level-headed head coach, right? Bill O'Brien, a lot of highs and lows, very, very emotional in his time there. But looking at the Texans, I think they need somebody that is going to be a veteran presence, right? Marvin Lewis, Jim Caldwell, guys that have been in the league for a long time. Obviously, I don't think Marvin Lewis is a great coach, but for Cincinnati, he was arguably the most successful coach that they've ever had in terms of win-loss because he was able to get them to the playoffs, but he could never get them over the hump. Deshaun Watson's a quarterback that you can do that with, right? He's a guy that can lead you into the playoffs and through the playoffs. I'm not the biggest Marvin Lewis fan, but at this point, he's a guy that actually does make some sense. You have a veteran-led roster, J.J. Watt, Deshaun Watson. You have guys that, are very, very passionate about this football team. You need somebody to kind of, keep things even keel. Bill O'Brien, too many highs, too many lows. You don't want a rah-rah guy because rah-rah guys don't work with veteran-led teams is what we've come to find out. So at this point, I think like a guy like Robert Saleh would not be a good fit there. A lot of people are very, very high on Saleh, but, that rah-rah thing, I'm not exactly sure for the Texans if that makes the most sense. But I think Robert Saleh has some other fits elsewhere. I think Detroit could be a good fit there. I think that potentially Atlanta could be a good fit, but Atlanta's focused on Bienemy. Bienemy is all of a sudden, arguably the hottest name going into this offseason. So the Jets are going to have to show some money for Bienemy to come to New York. Obviously, they've been kind of a disaster so far, especially this past season. So at this point, Joe Douglas, Bienemy would be interesting, but looking at the Texans' veteran-led head coach is what I think they kind of need to shoot for. I think that's a great question that you bring up.
Yeah, I definitely think that is the direction that they'll ultimately end up going. I don't see a college coach coming in and really taking that Texas or the Houston Texans coaching position. Looking at Robert Saleh, who you brought up, obviously was a really hot name when the 49ers made the run to the Super Bowl, did not get a head coaching gig that offseason. But now at this point, he could be up for one, maybe with the Detroit Lions you had alluded to. What could his pairing with Detroit kind of look like? Do you think that's a good move? And also they have a GM controversy right now, obviously. Walk us through kind of the news on the Detroit Lions and that GM vacancy.
Yeah, the GM vacancy is pretty interesting. There's a couple of guys that, they've been looking at so far. I bring up John Dorsey a lot. He's the guy that ultimately built that Cleveland Browns roster as we see it. The one downfall of him was he couldn't find the head coach. He did a horrible job filling the head coaching vacancy that they had. Obviously, that led to the demise of the team. However, that roster, if you look at it, arguably a top 5 roster. I think a lot of people would agree on paper, top 5 roster. He was aggressive. He did a lot of things that normal GMs wouldn't do. But at this point, I don't know if John Dorsey's back in the mix. I don't know. I've not heard his name resurface in a long time. So he very well could be out. Looking at Robert Saleh, I think a little bit of energy is what Detroit needs. I think it's been too lull there in Detroit. I think that the rawness of Robert Saleh would actually make sense in Detroit. I don't think the same effect would have in Houston, right? We talk about the veteran-led teams, and Detroit's a pretty young roster as a whole. Obviously, they had the veteran quarterback. But, I mean, as a whole, their roster is pretty young, especially on the offensive side of the football. But at this point, I think defense is a main priority, an issue for the Detroit Lions. I think Robert Saleh does make a lot of sense actually for Detroit to go after. I think that's probably the best fit for Saleh. And at that point, then he can kind of get the troops going in Detroit.
Yeah, it would definitely be interesting to see Saleh in a system where he doesn't necessarily have, multiple first-round selections in that front 7. He'd have a little bit of work to do in Detroit for sure. You could definitely see that impact their draft strategy, something we pay attention to quite a bit here on the channel. And now jumping into your favorite team, Austin, the Jacksonville Jaguars. There's rumors that Urban Meyer could come to town, but reports today say he wants at least $12 million a year to come coach the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's a ludicrous amount. Obviously, has also been linked to Ohio State's Ryan Day, but it doesn't sound like he even wants to go to the NFL yet at this point with his success he's found at OSU. What do you kind of think about the Jaguars' head coaching search, where it could lead them, and maybe a hot name that's kind of under the radar at this point?
Yeah, so at this point, I think Jacksonville is really, really kind of they're reaching for the stars here. I mean, they want Urban Meyer, huge name, huge figure. However, I don't think that's going to be a great fit. Obviously, he's had some issues where he goes, right? All of a sudden, health problems come up when things kind of get tough. I'm not saying that the health problems aren't legitimate. I really don't. But I just don't know if you want a guy that it's very possible in a year or two is not there because of said health problem. So I don't think that makes any sense if you're Jacksonville. You're looking for a long-term option. You're looking for a guy that'll be there for at least 5 to 10 years, however long it may be, even longer. But at this point, I think a guy like Brandon Staley, who is an extremely underrated coach in this process, he really transformed that Rams defense. Obviously, they have some really nice pieces, but he really put it together this year. Top 5 defense as a whole this season for the Rams. I think he's a really smart head coach if you listen to him. He just has a deeper level of understanding for the game. And even Sean McVay came out and was kind of vouching for him, saying, this guy loves football even more than I do. And we know how much of a freak Sean McVay is for football. He said that's the only guy that likes football more than me, which that kind of says a lot coming from Sean McVay, who absolutely loves the game holistically, everything about it. That's what he does for fun, is watch football. I mean, that's what you want to do. And Brandon Staley is a guy, even-keeled guy, kind of like Doug Marrone in that sense. That's what Shad Khan likes, is an even-keeled figure in terms of the press on the field, how he presents himself. I think Brandon Staley's the perfect fit for Jacksonville. I'm really hoping that's what happens.
Yeah, Staley could be a really nice addition into that coaching staff for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, a lot of that offense is intact, especially with that first overall pick. You've got a near Pro Bowl running back in James Robinson, 2 really promising receivers in DJ Chark and Laviska Shenault. Obviously, that tight end room needs a little bit of help. That offensive line needs a little bit of help. But bringing in a QB, whether it be Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields, would really solidify that offense. Bring in a defensive guy, get the most out of that defense. You could be looking at a really good pairing. Obviously, we've seen some really good defensive teams with offensive coordinators coming in as head coaches really find success having that balance. And it could be that way for the Jacksonville Jaguars as well. Another name to watch, in my opinion, on them could be Dabo Swinney. They've kind of cooled down the little reports on that, but the Clemson head coach could maybe make the transition to the NFL with his quarterback, Trevor Lawrence. What do you think of that pairing if that were to come to fruition?
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting to bring up. College guys, it doesn't always work. We've seen that, right? But looking at Dabo Swinney, the key thing would be if Dabo Swinney's in the door, that means Trevor Lawrence is a for sure draft pick for Jacksonville. And that's kind of the hope at this point. You don't want them to kind of get other ideas about other players at the number one spot. I think that they should stick with Trevor Lawrence at that point. Obviously, he knows his quarterback. He knows what he's capable of. Dabo Swinney's a program builder, right? He was able to defeat the mighty Alabama teams. And at this point, having a program builder for a young roster is okay. It's okay. You don't have to have that veteran head coach. You can experiment with the college guy, and then everybody can kind of learn together, right? It's all a growing thing. You're one part of the team isn't ahead of the other, right? The roster isn't, far ahead of where the head coach is mentally at the NFL scale. So at that point, you can afford to bring in possibly a college guy. Obviously, I have my preference towards Staley. I think that is interesting, though, the Dabo Swinney. I think he is going to stay put in Clemson, but that is something that hasn't been brought up for a while, but very well could resurface at some point.
Yeah, it's ultimately how I feel about the situation as well. And just looking at another college coach, PJ Fleck, it just, he's really built up that Minnesota program. That you talk about the importance of being a coach, building something up there. That's something the NFL, some of these lower end teams that usually fire their head coach are really looking for when it comes to coaching candidates, coaches who can, put together pieces, build their own program up and really turn a team into a winner. That's something Fleck's been shown to do. But just in this head coaching market, it doesn't seem like there's really a clear fit for him at this point. Where would you kind of look for PJ Fleck if there was an opportunity for him?
Yeah, I think for PJ Fleck, it's either the opportunity to move higher up in the college ranks for head coaching gigs or possibly a low end, franchise in the NFL. But at this point, when I look at the names, I just don't see there being a fit in terms of there's going to be a lot of other guys that have priority over him until he does something really, really big in college football. I don't see that transition being made. Obviously, he's the program builder, but after listening to Mike Tannenbaum talk about head coaching and being a general manager, right? He mentioned when Jim Harbaugh came in to interview for the head coaching position, and at that point, 3/4 through the interview, he had said, Jim Harbaugh stopped the interview and said, "I'm not ready for the league. I'm just not ready for the NFL." So very interesting. A guy that, obviously found some success later on, but PJ Fleck is only 40 years old. I think he needs a little bit more time to continue to grow at the college level, and he just really needs to build a solid foundation at the U of M, win some bowl games again, and ultimately the goal would be to get to that national championship. Then I think there'd be a little more consideration, but since he is not a stout offensive or defensive coordinator, he's not that kind of mind. He's not the X's and O's coach. He's the rah, let's get it going. If we look at Pat McAfee, he talked about how PJ Fleck will get you to run through a wall. Like after talking to him, said that's the most inspiring coach you'll ever meet. But at some point, a lot of these teams are looking for a guy that can call plays too. So he doesn't offer that versatility.
Yeah, definitely with Fleck, you're probably going to be seeing him row the boat at least for another year, maybe two, before he really gets to, advance his career as a coach. But now, Austin, I want to kind of break off from what we've been talking about and just kind of get your thoughts on some of the vacancies. If you were a GM or interviewing for GM positions and you had your selection of the available GM spots, which one would be the most attractive to you? The Houston Texans obviously don't have some of their selections in the next year. The Detroit Lions, the Jacksonville Jaguars, or the Atlanta Falcons?
Yeah, at this point, it's very, very tough considering Houston's a great spot to land because you have the quarterback in place. That's the easy answer, obviously. But it's very tough without those picks. I mean, you can't continue to build off the roster. And, I mean, they were a bad team this year, obviously enough to warrant them, having the number 3 pick if they had their pick. So at that point, just a lot of issues there. Obviously, you're probably a head coach away from at least getting them back to 500. But I'm not super, super excited about that one. The Falcons are a very interesting team. Obviously, Matt Ryan's there, Julio Jones, but some nice pieces on the roster, but some of it's aging at the same time. Very interesting spot there. But I think trying to remove all bias, I still think it is Jacksonville, just considering the amount of assets they currently have in place. Plus, you have the patience of an owner like Shad Khan, who, gave Dave Caldwell a ton of leash for years and years and years, a ton of leash. So at this point, I think that, having Shad Khan and Jacksonville would be very interesting. Obviously, you're not playing for the most historic franchise one that's had a terrible reputation throughout its history. But I think in terms of what assets are in place or will be in place year one, I would like to be the GM because I have my selection of picks. I can take my guys.
Yeah, definitely. You're looking at a pretty unique situation there. You have the first overall pick, another first round pick from the deal with the Los Angeles Rams and Jalen Ramsey. You have pick 33 as well in the draft. You're looking at 3 of the top 33 selections. It's something that not a lot of teams really have access to. They also have some really good offensive players. DJ Chark's a near Pro Bowl level receiver when he has good quarterback play. James Robinson was absolutely stellar this year. They already have some young pieces on that defense too. I think that they're going to be a team that moving forward is going to take a lot of the right steps in the right direction. Does that get to them to the playoffs? Who knows? They're in a very tough division with the Tennessee Titans, the Indianapolis Colts, and even the Houston Texans, like we mentioned. But Trevor Lawrence is going to be the difference maker there for them. I think that they are the most attractive landing spot for a GM. Now, how about for a head coach? You've got the Texans, Falcons, New York Jets, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Detroit Lions. Is there a specific place you would rather coach out of those 6 options?
To me, it is going to be the LA Chargers. They have a lot of current pieces in place on the roster. And like we had mentioned earlier, a lot of close games that they lost, right? And if I'm a head coach, I feel confident I can win some of those games for sure. Stepping into that role, you have the franchise quarterback. You have really good offensive pieces, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Hunter Henry, Austin Eckler. You have some nice pieces on the defensive side of the ball, Derwin James, Joey Bosa, et cetera, et cetera. And at this point, I think you feel really good if you are stepping into this Chargers role. Obviously, you have a pretty good GM in Tom Telesco. He knows what he's doing. So I trust that the right pieces would be put in place for me as a head coach. So I really like the Chargers as an opening.
Right. Tom Telesco has done a very good job adding the right talent at the right time, especially in the draft. He's done a really good job putting pieces in there. And just remember, too, Anthony Lynn led this team to 7-9. Didn't manage the end of games very well, like you had mentioned, but they also didn't have Derwin James all season. It's been basically 2 years now since Derwin James has played an NFL game. And you're looking at a Chargers team that when he's healthy, they're a lot better. He's one of the best safeties in the NFL, gives him a lot of help. He can rush the passer off the edge, kind of like what Jamal Adams does. As a blitzer, but also gives them a little bit different in pass options, a good zone coverage guy, and just, an absolute freak athletically. And you're looking at a Chargers head coach coming in there with a team that won 7-9, lost close games, and didn't have their best defensive player, arguably. It seems like a really, really great place to be for a head coach. I think the Chargers are going to be a team that really takes a jump forward depending on who comes in there. That'll conclude our video here, though. I hope you guys did enjoy the coaching carousel video. We'll obviously be keeping you up to date as hirings come in. Maybe Urban Meyer to Jacksonville. That's yet to be seen. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Don't forget to hit the like button. Let us know down in the comments below who you want your favorite team to hire if one of your favorite teams does have a coaching vacancy, and we'll catch you in the next one.